Listen carefully. This is not a message for everyone. This is not encouragement. This is confirmation. If you are hearing this, it is because your last move shifted something in the unseen. You didn't announce it. You didn't explain it. You didn't fight back. You simply withdrew. And that silence, that distance, that calm decision to step back instead of react, did more than any argument ever could. It revealed your level. It exposed your clarity. It showed that you are no longer operating from impulse, emotion, or survival. That moment convinced them. They now know you are not confused. They now know you are not broken. They now know you are not dependent on validation, attention, or approval to exist. And that realization unsettled the spiritual atmosphere around you, because systems built on control cannot function around someone who is internally free. Right now, many of you feel isolated, misunderstood, and cut off, not just from people, but from familiarity itself. You are alone, even when surrounded, disconnected even when spoken to. The conversations feel hollow, the environments feel foreign, the faces that once felt close now feel distant. And quietly, without drama, you've been asking yourself, why does it feel like everyone disappeared at the same time? Understand this clearly. This is not punishment. This is not rejection. This is not loss. This is divine protection activating in real time. When your spirit outgrows a frequency, separation happens naturally. Not because you are better, but because you are different now. Your silence removed access. Your restraint removed leverage. Your withdrawal exposed who was connected to your energy and who was feeding from it. That is why things feel empty. That is why the noise stopped. That is why certain doors closed without explanation. The unseen recognized that you no longer needed the lesson, so the environment adjusted. This phase feels uncomfortable because it is unfamiliar, but unfamiliar does not mean wrong. It means new alignment. You are being pulled out of reaction and into observation, out of explanation and into authority, out of seeking and into knowing. Before we go any further, if this message resonates with your spirit, comment, "I am chosen." It is not for me, it is for alignment. Words carry placement power, and alignment responds to declaration. And if you haven't already, like this video and subscribe, because this channel exists to remind you who you are when the world tries to make you forget. What you're experiencing now is the calm before recalibration. The isolation is not abandonment. It is refinement. You were removed so you could no longer be diluted. You were silenced so your presence could become louder. You were separated so your next connections would meet you at your level, not pull you back to theirs. Trust this phase. Stay still. Stay clear. The unseen is rearranging everything around your obedience to step back. Now let's dive deeper. Point 1. The loneliness you feel right now is not emotional abandonment. It is strategic spiritual separation, and it is important you understand this clearly, so you do not misinterpret what is happening to you. Chosen one, your loneliness is not coming from rejection, failure, or a lack of worth. It is coming from elevation. There is a deep misunderstanding many people carry about loneliness. They assume loneliness means something is missing, something has gone wrong, or someone has been left behind. But in your current season, loneliness means something unnecessary has been removed. What you are experiencing is not emptiness. It is space. Space for recalibration. Space for clarity. Space for your identity to solidify without interference or distortion. When God prepares someone for a higher assignment, He does not surround them with crowds, applause, or constant companionship. He creates distance. Distance is not punishment, it is preparation. Crowds dilute focus. Crowds introduce noise. Crowds pull your attention outward when it must turn inward. This is why conversations now feel shallow, repetitive, or draining. This is why social interaction exhausts you faster than it used to. This is why being around people feels loud even when no one is speaking. Your nervous system has changed. Your discernment has sharpened. Your spirit has matured to a point where it can no longer tolerate misalignment, hidden agendas, or emotional clutter. You are no longer wired for casual access. The loneliness is not punishing you. It is protecting you from reverting to an old frequency you have already outgrown. If certain people had remained close, they would have pulled you backward without intending to, simply by operating from a level you no longer occupy. So they were removed quietly, without explanation, without closure, and without drama. This is not cruelty. This is precision. This is divine editing. God is reducing external influence so your internal compass can recalibrate. He is removing voices so you can finally hear your own clearly. He is thinning the environment so your true strength can surface without distraction. What feels like isolation is actually insulation. You are being shielded while something powerful stabilizes within you. This season is not about being understood by others. It is about becoming undeniable to yourself. Stay still. Stay grounded. What is being formed in this silence will not need validation when it is revealed. Point 2. Your last move revealed self-mastery, and self-mastery is intimidating to those who rely on control. There was a time when people expected you to react on cue, as if your emotions were a switch they could flip whenever it suited them. They expected anger they could provoke, sadness they could exploit, and explanations they could twist. They expected you to rush to defend your name, to clarify your intentions, and to chase understanding from people who never intended to give it. That expectation was the foundation of their comfort with you. But this time, you didn't play the role. This time, you paused, and that pause spoke louder than any argument ever could. You observed without flinching. You withdrew without hostility. You chose restraint instead of reaction, and in doing so, you changed the entire equation. Because emotion is predictable. Emotion is programmable. But restraint is foreign to those who survive by pulling strings. They know how to bait anger. They know how to trigger guilt. They know how to harvest explanations. What they do not know how to deal with is composure. When you stopped reacting, you removed their leverage without announcing it. When you stopped explaining, you closed doors they assumed would always remain open. When you chose silence, you didn't disappear. You elevated. Silence, in that moment, was not weakness. It was authority. It communicated something unmistakable to both the visible and invisible audience watching your evolution. This one is no longer operating from impulse. This one is no longer emotionally accessible on demand. This one has crossed into self-governance. And that realization is deeply unsettling to anyone who benefited from your former availability. They felt it immediately, even if they couldn't articulate it. A subtle panic set in, not because you attacked, but because you didn't. Not because you confronted, but because you detached. They sensed that something fundamental had ended. Not a relationship, not a conversation, a dynamic. The old pattern where they provoked and you responded no longer exists. The unspoken contract where your energy was available for their use has been quietly revoked. And what makes this moment so powerful is that you didn't announce your departure. You didn't warn them. You simply moved differently, You became unreadable. You became self-contained. And in a world where control depends on access, your self-mastery felt like a door closing forever. Point 3. Isolation is the final filter before alignment, not a detour away from it. Many people want purpose without preparation, clarity without pruning, and blessing without separation. But life does not work that way at higher levels. Every elevation begins with a narrowing. Before visibility, there is invisibility. Before affirmation, there is silence. Before the next assignment, there is a quiet detachment from the previous one. Right now, you are not being punished or delayed. You are being filtered. This phase is not about loneliness. It is about precision. Not everyone who walked with you is meant to walk ahead of you. Some people were companions for a season, not counterparts for the journey. Some were lessons disguised as relationships, not partners meant for permanence. Some were mirrors sent to expose patterns, wounds, and blind spots, not anchors meant to remain. And instead of forcing painful confrontations or dramatic endings, the divine often chooses distance. Distance is the cleanest form of truth. It reveals without debate, without explanations, and without emotional warfare. In isolation, you begin to see clearly who genuinely supported your growth, who drained your energy, who respected your boundaries, and who merely consumed access to you without investing anything in return. This clarity is uncomfortable because it strips away illusions you once survived on. It removes familiar voices, familiar routines, and familiar validations, even when those things were quietly costing you your alignment. This is why the phase feels heavy. Filters always feel heavy because they remove what feels known, even when what is known is unhealthy. Isolation slows life down so your nervous system can recalibrate. It quiets the noise so your intuition can speak again. It breaks unconscious attachments to approval, belonging, and external identity. In this space, you are no longer reacting. You are observing. You are no longer performing. You are integrating. You are no longer explaining yourself. You are remembering who you are without witnesses. Alignment requires this kind of silence because purpose is not revealed in crowds. It is refined in solitude. When the filtering is complete, what remains is lighter, cleaner, and truer. The next connections will not feel chaotic or draining. They will feel familiar without being familiar, supportive without effort, and aligned without explanation. Until then, honor the isolation. It is not rejection. It is protection. It is not abandonment. It is alignment forming quietly behind the scenes. Point 4. Your energy has entered a protected state, and protection almost always feels like restriction before it feels like peace. So if it feels like your world has suddenly grown quieter, smaller, and more contained, understand that this is not punishment or loss. It is calibration. Fewer messages come through now. Invitations slow down. People who once had constant access no longer check in the same way. This is not because you became less valuable or less visible. It is because your energy became selective. Something within you shifted and your system no longer tolerates constant intrusion. Your nervous system now rejects chaos automatically. What once felt normal now feels draining. What once felt harmless now feels invasive. Your intuition flags misalignment almost instantly, without needing logic or explanation, and the divine honors this internal upgrade by narrowing who can reach you. This is energetic quarantine, not because you are weak, but because you are potent. Powerful energy cannot remain open without leaking into spaces that cannot hold it. When energy leaks, it dissipates. When it is contained, it strengthens. That is why oversharing feels wrong now, even with people you once trusted. That is why certain conversations leave you feeling exposed rather than understood. That is why you instinctively pull back without guilt, apology, or explanation. You are being trained to guard your inner world with maturity, not fear. This season is not about becoming cold or distant. It is about becoming precise. Not everyone deserves access to your thoughts because thoughts shape reality. Not everyone deserves access to your emotions because emotions carry creative force. Not everyone deserves access to your plans because plans are still forming and fragile before they harden into reality. You are learning discretion, not distrust. There is a difference. Distrust closes the heart. Discretion protects it. The divine is teaching you when to be open and when to be sealed, when to speak and when to remain silent, and when to share and when to let something grow in private. This phase may feel lonely at times, but it is not isolation. It is containment, and containment is what allows pressure to create diamonds instead of explosions. When this protection fully integrates, peace will replace restriction, and you will realize that what felt like being cut off was actually being covered. Point 5. Your absence triggered awareness in those who relied on your presence. This is one of the most uncomfortable awakenings for people who benefited from your consistency, your emotional availability, your reliability, and your quiet strength. The truth is that some individuals never consciously valued what you provided, because it was always there, steady and unquestioned, woven into the background of their lives like air. Familiarity dulled perception. Your patience became expected. Your support became assumed. Your presence became a constant. They stopped noticing. But when you stepped back, not dramatically, not with confrontation, not with anger, something shifted. The silence you left behind created space, and space forces awareness. When you stopped initiating, the one-sided effort became visible. When you stopped checking in, the imbalance exposed itself. When you withdrew emotionally, the dependency that had gone unacknowledged finally surfaced. Your distance was not an attack. It was a mirror. And what it reflected made people uncomfortable. Not because you harmed them, but because you removed a source of regulation they had been leaning on unconsciously. You did not accuse. You did not explain. You simply stopped supplying what they had grown accustomed to receiving freely, your reassurance, your grounding, your emotional labor. That absence felt like a threat because it disrupted comfort, not connection. People who rely on external sources to stabilize their emotions often panic when that source disappears, because it forces them to face what they avoided developing within themselves. In your absence, they were left with their own thoughts, their own insecurities, and their own unbalanced patterns. And that is when awareness arrived. They noticed how much you carried. They noticed how often you gave. They noticed how little they reciprocated. More importantly, they sensed something deeper, that you no longer needed them in the same way they needed you. That realization altered the unspoken hierarchy of the relationship. Power shifted, not through dominance, but through detachment. You reclaimed your energy without demanding recognition, and that is what made it permanent. Once someone realizes you are no longer dependent on their approval, attention, or validation, the dynamic can never return to its previous state. Your absence did not diminish you, it revealed you, and the awareness it triggered cannot be undone. Point 6. This season feels heavy, not because you are failing, but because you are transitioning, and transition always carries weight. You are standing between identities, no longer able to live inside the old version of yourself, yet not fully embodied in the new one that is forming. The habits, tolerances, and emotional reflexes that once kept you safe no longer fit, and that mismatch creates discomfort. This in-between space feels lonely because familiar mirrors no longer reflect who you are becoming. It feels uncertain because the future has not yet taken shape. It feels quiet in a way that amplifies every thought, every memory, and every unresolved emotion. But this is not emptiness, it is integration. This is where scattered lessons settle into the nervous system. This is where clarity stops being an idea and becomes a posture, a way of standing in the world. You are not being delayed or overlooked. You are being stabilized. What comes next will demand calm under pressure, discernment without hesitation, and internal authority that does not seek validation. Those traits are not built through noise, stimulation, or constant motion. They are forged in stillness. This is the final season of carrying weight in silence, the last compression before release, the moment just before strength becomes visible. Point 7. Your last move did not just convince people, it signaled completion in the unseen. Completion does not look like celebration. It looks like stillness. It looks like calm detachment. It looks like no longer needing to prove anything. Your restraint was not weakness, it was evidence. Evidence that you have learned what you needed to learn. Evidence that you can now move without emotional turbulence. Evidence that you are no longer reactive to environments that once controlled you. This is why resistance increased when you changed. This is why distance followed growth. This is why silence now surrounds you. The system recognizes when someone can no longer be managed the old way, and the divine recognizes when someone is ready for the next assignment. You were not isolated because you failed. You were isolated because you passed. If this resonates at a deep level, comment again, "I am chosen." Stay still, stay grounded, stay protected. What feels like loneliness right now is actually the final preparation for alignment.